I wanted to do a brief recording about how important this book was for me. Lots of people have a book of origin, maybe it's Dawkins or a bunch of other things when they create artificial life simulation. This is the book that was most important to me with regards to writing software early on. It's Write Your Own Fantasy Games for Your Microcomputer, which is a Nussbaum book, which you can actually find the free PDF available almost everywhere. And if you want the Dungeon of Doom program cassette, sorry, probably a little bit too late to the game for this. This was published in, I think, 1984, and it is just the most amazing book for me at the time. As a child, this told me everything I needed to know with regards to the computers. To learn how to program, had to explore deeper into Dungeons and Dragons and these kind of things. And this was the book that was most important to me. This is literally a game programming book. So at the time I did this, I did my own Dungeons and Dragons maps and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, so this is taking the maps and putting fantasy games on a computer. That makes perfect sense because at the time, obviously, D&D was very well known to me. I had done all the dice, done all the stuff, and this book was just like, so this is the next level. You basically take software and you write it to simulate. And look at this. Barbarian, Knight, Scholar. You don't need any other edification in there. And of course, goblins, deadly snakes, skeletons, layers of dungeon. This is incredibly important. Here we have a magician, thief, and dwarf. Other characters, important things. So this talks about the dungeon master's role, which was already very important to me, already well known by the time I got my hands on this book. And this explains the role of the dungeon master in the game, who plays the dungeon master, again, more computer, and then we get into the programming. We get into character creation, what a games module is, what you see on your screen. All this was incredibly important. And then explained what you did in the games module, how you wrote the software, and then it gets into the actual software writing. So this is the graphics, storing the data, all this stuff just seemed so completely fitting together. And then we get into the programming code, which wasn't actually that applicable in the stuff I was writing on. Although when I got down to black and white graphics and compressing black and white graphics, this was also applicable. But by the time I got to this, the Macintosh was my computer. So this really mixes metaphors because there's no Macintosh description here. But certainly BASIC at the time, and then C and probably Pascal for a period of time were incredibly important. And this whole thing just fits it all perfectly together. And then we get into the coding part, various eclectic coding, which is only applicable for the computers, which it says on the front, I think. On the front of it, it should say what computers it's applicable for. Here we are. For the Commodore 64, the VIC-20, 16K Electron, Spectrum, and BBC. No, none of these computers were about when I started programming. But certainly the Macintosh was about, Apple II was about. So a lot of my, this book was so important to me. You can't imagine a boy of, I don't know, 8 to 10, which is when I first picked up this book, and it was just like, okay, this all fits together perfectly. And of course, I didn't own a copy of this book at the time. You can now download it free PDF all over the web. It's one of the most accessible books of its time and its genre. So if you want to download it, you just Google it. I think there's a Reddit that has the PDF downloadable. So you can just download it from Reddit or wherever. I mean, I think Usborne themselves actually include links to the PDF. So if you can dig through Usborne's site for their computer programming series, that'll give you a link to download. Of course, this is source code which wasn't applicable to what the stuff I was doing at the time, but it was just great to see that you could do. And I literally wrote code books for years. I wrote code books like this, but just code books that would be programmable into, I don't know, some IBM Micro PC stuff. It was, my jam. I'd write, whatever code was necessary, Pascal, C, BASIC, even if I needed to get done what I need to get done. So these are all code. It's all lines of code, which is the remainder of the book. And then we get to the interesting stuff. What ASCII stands for. Various bits and pieces here. Discussion associated with fantasy notice boards, computer games, magazines for micro users, fantasy board games. Look at this. Magazines for fantasy fans. Look at this. Dungeons and Dragons. I don't think they even talk about Games Workshop here. Usborne Publishing. Still in London. My friend John Rogers, who does the walks around London, has walked past Usborne Publishing in the past. Anyway, Tom Barbaland, Las Vegas, Nevada. Just giving you a little indication of why this book was so important to me.